Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Adam Fitzgerald, Enterprise Sales Director here at BDEX. We are missing BDEX's CEO, David Finkelstein, today, and our CMO, Jesse Lezak, but we are excited for a great episode in store for you today. And I'm excited to be joined today by BDEX's CTO, David Wellborn, who we lovingly refer to as DW. Good to see you, DW. What's new in your world?
No, it's really nice to see you too. I really do enjoy these podcasts, and it's been a while since I've had a chance to do one, so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. And we're happy for you to be here too. Today on Deconstructing Data, we're also thrilled to welcome Bill Bruno, who is the CEO of Celebrus. Bill, it is good to have you on the show today as well. Maybe you can kick us off by telling us your story about kind of what led you to become CEO of Celebrus and what you're doing over there at Celebrus.
Sure. Thanks, guys. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. And the short answer is you get here with a lot of luck and good timing, right? But my entire career has been in the data and analytics industry. I was a computer engineer. Out of college, co-founded a consulting firm focused on what at the time was called web analytics. It's come a long way since then. Sold that consulting firm to a UK-based company and spent several years helping build their global analytics media practices and doing some M&A. Took some time off and then eventually landed here at Celebrus. I've had the pleasure of running the company globally here out of Chicago for a little over 3 years now, but my passion is just helping organizations solve complex challenges and get better data into the right hands of really smart people so they could make better decisions, build great experiences for their consumers, make more money, save money, all the things that we're trying to do on a daily basis that ideally data can form the foundation of.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking a little bit before the show started about your background and your exposure to data, and it sounds like it's the perfect skill set for what we do on this podcast, which is deconstruct data, right? And so I'm excited about what we've got lined up to talk about today. And so without any further ado, let's dive right on into our first topic, which is capturing digital data, why quality matters. Bill, you want to kick us off on this?
Yeah, I think there's probably no more of an opportune time than nowadays to be talking about digital data quality, particularly with the rise of importance and the speed at which AI is being adopted or experimented upon by brands around the globe. For a long time in the data industry, the statement's sort of been garbage in, garbage out, right? And that was even back when it was simpler, when there wasn't even mobile apps or mobile sites. And now when you look at the landscape of how consumers can interact with brands across their own channels, things like their websites, their mobile apps, ATMs, kiosks, et cetera, and then expand beyond that into social and everything else that comes with it, it's increasingly difficult for brands to truly understand the journeys their customers are on. But the understanding of that and having the right level of granularity of that information is critical, not only to optimizing things like your ad spend, but frankly, just determining what's working and what isn't and how to make experiences better for consumers. On the flip side, as a final point, to kind of kick things off, then having better data, to me, there's this conundrum I've seen my entire career where a lot of times brands, they settle. And what I mean by that is they select technologies or approaches and there's limitations in it. And so instead of pushing those limits or exploring other ways to build better data quality or create better data, they find themselves sort of falling victim to the shortcomings of some of the tech they've chosen. And what you see happen then over time, and you might not realize it until you get to this point, particularly nowadays with people diving into artificial intelligence, is that the data quality is not there, that it's not granular enough to drive real power in your modeling. And it's not something you can just fix overnight either, right? So the decisions that have been made years ago potentially are impacting the decisions that you can make today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and a great way to kick this off. We have one of our listeners, Layla, chimed in with a question. have we reached a point where collecting more data is doing more harm than good? And I think that's a really valid question. Curious on your thoughts there, Bill.
I think it's a really interesting question, right? And it kind of there used to be a time where you would just talk about the business requirements and collect data specific to those requirements, right? And a lot of solutions are sort of tagging based. You're writing a bunch of custom code to collect that information. And I think that there's an inherent sort of bias in that is important to call out, because when you're in this sort of more data, less data, how much data is enough type conundrum, you do have to look at it through a few different lenses, right? You have to look at it through the lens of starting with less data usually means you're making a decision deliberately to not collect certain pieces of information, which inherently could introduce a bias into your data sets and also potentially undercut your goals or the use cases that you might come up with 6, 12, 18 months from now. The counterpoint to that, to Layla's question, is the more data that you're collecting from more channels does put a level of responsibility on the brand and the teams doing it to adhere to compliance, right? I think my stance is that more data is not the problem. I think inaccurate data is the problem. And I think a lot of times when brands make the argument, oh, we don't need more data, it's because they can't fathom doing it, because the solutions that they're using, and candidly, we run into this all the time when we meet with organizations at events or conferences, et cetera, is they're just tired. They're exhausted by how much effort it takes to just increase their data quality just a little bit with their existing tech stacks. And so the idea of just, I'm going to bring in more data is daunting and overwhelming. But you can't lose track of compliance, right? When you do collect data, regardless of where you're at in the world, and our software is live in a little over 30 countries today around the globe. Everybody's got some sort of compliance, GDPR in Europe, et cetera. And if you're going to collect data, it needs to be from a standpoint of how do we maintain compliance with the local legislation of the consumer? How do we uphold consumer trust, et cetera? So there's a lot to unpack there, I think, in the, is more better, but hopefully that gives a little bit of insight into that, at least in terms of how my brain thinks about it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. DW, what about you with your technical brain and background? What are your thoughts on that question?
Well, about more data versus good data, you can do. I think you can do a lot with very little data if it's deterministic. People think that maybe volume kind of makes up for the quality. In my experience, that's not been the case. Really, if you want to do micro targeting, good targeting, you need good quality data, and it turns out you don't need a whole lot. How much is enough? Actually, I was going to ask you this question, Bill, and I found myself almost talking about it. So I'm going to turn this around on you. One of the things you guys do, I believe, is an identity graph, right? Right. So, yeah. Have you run into problems of pollution, I guess, of your identity graph, and how have you resolved or prevented this going forward?
It's a great question, right? And I think we do provide an identity graph as a core element of Celebrus, and behind that, a variety of features and functionality around building consumer profiles in a compliant manner. The key thing for how we think about identity, though, and this is a really, I think, critical juncture, because it can get polluted very quickly, particularly because third-party data and third-party technologies and sources are getting undercut, as we all know, from browser regulations and changes, et cetera. And a lot of that's not to be trusted and could result in bad information or poor quality of data, to your point. Ours is all focused on the owned channels of the brands. So when we stand up a Celebrus install for a customer, it's dedicated to them. It's a single tenant private cloud instance that is being deployed across their websites, mobile apps, et cetera. Over the top of the data model we give them is this identity graph, but it's deterministic. And we think it's really important for that. So obviously Celebrus will set an identity for someone who's come to the site and we don't know them. Let's just say I'm going to a website for the first time. Celebrus will establish an identity for me, provided I've opted into that. and will begin building a profile about me without even needing to know who I am. This could be the pages I'm viewing, the simple stuff, right? Things that could be used for targeting or micro-targeting, to your point, et cetera. Doing all of that without any tagging and without having to write a bunch of custom code, which is usually where the human error comes in other technologies and results in there being a lot of data quality challenges. But ultimately then what gets added to that graph and how we start to sort of collect the various ways that you might be able to identify me, provided I've consented to that, is all deterministic. Now, clients naturally will use that in cases to make probabilistic decisions or to feed predictive models. But for us, in terms of data quality, I stand by this. I think it's really important to take the guesswork out of digital data wherever you can, and leave the guesswork for the analytics that happens on the back end, or perhaps running in parallel in real time as you're updating advertising segments, et cetera, and using a cleansed data set that's structured and logical to help feed into some of those decisions that you might have historically not had enough data to make.
So here's another end of the spectrum question. Is like, so this is all deterministic data. It's like first party data, we used to call it. I don't know if people call it that, but then I saw you commenting on LinkedIn about what do you mean there's no cookieless tracking? We do cookieless tracking. Mm-hmm. So so how is it that you're doing cookieless tracking and yet it's still deterministic?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually built this for a bank in Spain originally, who took a very strict compliance approach to GDPR, extremely strict. Now, again, entirely up to them, right? What we try to do is provide a data platform that gives you options, and those options then are litigated and reviewed by compliance and security teams at each individual customer, right? We don't try to force sort of an approach on a client, right? We want to give them the tools to do what fits for them. And this has actually been adopted in several places, including a few healthcare orgs throughout the States, particularly for consumers in Colorado and California, where it's quite strict. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, if we take a journey, and let's say, I just gave you an example of an identity graph kicking in, right? Let's take the same scenario, only this time I arrive on the website and I opt out. I say, please don't track me. In this case, you could shut Celebrus off completely, and some clients do. But what we invented, and we did this, there's a lot of work that went into this, but we call it anonymized data collection. It's a bit of a mouthful, right? Or ADC. But ultimately what it does is when someone opts out, brands have the option of enabling this feature in Celebrus. What happens when this is, so when I arrive on the site and I opt out, what happens is the Celebrus functionality turns down to a very minute set of features. We don't set any identities. We don't set any cookies. We don't persist any information. We don't capture any PII. And we don't capture anything that you as a consumer might type or put in or provide in the digital channels. All we really collect is the journey. And what we layer in behind that, so the pages you're viewing and the content you're consuming, it's headless though, right? There's no person to it. There's no cookies. There's no persistence. You close the browser, it's gone. But what it allows brands to do is still monitor what largely nowadays is called like product analytics, right? But just ensuring that the site is performing for your users, right? Without having to know who they are. The other thing that it does offer is we have some patents around this, but we have a machine learning model that consumes the content itself that you're viewing and generates signals of interest and intent. And you can use those to maybe reorder the articles or maybe reorder the products that I'm seeing based upon a product that I've clicked on. So I call it more, it's kind of like when I started my career, the only thing you could do in advertising or even in marketing was contextual relevance, right? It was, hey, if I sell shoes, maybe I should put my ad on a website that talks about shoes, right? There was no concept of personalization. There was no concept of retargeting, right? Or anything like that. None of that existed. So what this basically does is in a just a generic format with no personal information creates an opportunity to build a contextually relevant experience without ever setting a cookie or knowing who I am or persisting any of that information.
Gotcha. So basically, the people become like a stick figure,
Yeah,
and you just watch the stick figure go through the motions. Interesting.
100%.
Well, yeah, I was gonna, because we do a cookieless identity stuff at BDEX, and I was going to ask, okay, so how is your kung fu better than my kung fu?
Right.
But what you just explained is actually a little bit different. It's actually not identity. It's
Right.
It's cookieless tracking, but for the activity, not so much the individual.
Exactly.
Did I get that right?
Okay. That was for us, because of the nature of our product, versus what you guys do. For us, it's for individual brands. We're just trying to give them the opportunity to build better experiences and understand their consumers, right? And it doesn't, what we do doesn't leave their channels, right? Like, you're not going to access a Celebrus cookie, for example, on a third-party publisher website or anything like that. So what we wanted to be able to provide was kind of a way to complete the abacus. I mean, the business challenge that sits behind this, right? If you look in the UK, for example, where the ICO, it said that when people opt out, you have to turn off your analytics cookies, right? Regardless of how you're using them. What that means for marketers who are already probably in the most challenging times for marketers that have ever existed, what that means is they're going dark. So if you want to ask a very simple question of what's my web traffic look like month on month, suddenly we had some prospects that are now customers come to us saying, yeah, we're losing 60% visibility of just top level metrics, right? And so adding that back in gives them at least an understanding, from an analytics perspective of how much traffic they're driving to the site, where is it coming from, et cetera. So it's really about filling gaps that have been created, and rightfully so from a compliance perspective, but doing it in a way that sets nothing for identity, because it's really the only way you can do it and still adhere to the compliance, whether it's GDPR or CPRA or whatever it might be.
Well, I think that leads really into kind of our next topic here, which is all about personalized experiences and how we can use data for growth. So I think Bill would love to kind of hear kind of your initial thoughts here.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because it ties into the question earlier: more data, less data, what's the right amount of data, right? I think what we try to do with customers when we're talking about personalization is better understanding the use case. It's very easy to quickly say you need everything, right? The reality is you don't. There's certain use cases that maybe need information right then and there while I'm on that mobile screen or while I'm on that page on my laptop to try to drive better value. But there are things that are more latent, right? Triggering different marketing campaigns, or even things like direct mail, right? All of it's interrelated. All of it can be impacted by digital data. And it's sort of like, for years, everybody said it. I've said it for my entire consulting career. It's all about starting somewhere, right? I think it can be a bit misleading when you go to a conference and everybody, if you're a brand or someone in a brand just trying to get started with personalization, maybe you've deployed a solution like an Optimizely or an Adobe Target, and you're just trying to do some simple stuff, right? A/B tests, things like that. And you go to these conferences and people talk about these massive programs or decisioning programs they've built with Pegasystems or Salesforce or even Celebrus. And it can feel daunting because you're like, well, how am I going to get there? Right. And I think, personalization can mean so many different things to so many different people that when we're meeting with brands, it's just about building kind of a reasonable approach to taking the data that they have today and using that to try to drive some decisions that could make my experience as a consumer better, or your experience as a consumer better, or conversely, protect the consumer, in the case of things like fraud.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the things that jumps out to me when I think about personalization and how data gets used is it feels like it's a little bit of a buzzword in our industry, right?
Sure is. Yeah.
We hear it all the time, personalized advertising. reach the right person in the right place with the right message, right? But I think the reality is a lot of companies struggle to execute personalization really effectively. So I'm curious for our listeners, what would you recommend are kind of the key ingredients for being able to really deliver truly personalized experiences kind of at scale?
It's a great question. And I agree with you, Adam. I think sometimes the buzzword gets in the way of the activity.
Yep.
And I think in many ways, the industry, because of some of these buzzwords, has caused some of the fear consumers feel, right? Like if you mention personalization to a consumer as just a broad term, they're immediately going to be nervous about privacy, and they're going to think these big things like you're following me all over the internet, right? That's kind of the immediate place that brains go. And the reality is, if we all experience personalization and we don't even realize it, right? You go into one of the 3 million streaming apps available now, and you get personalized recommendations, and people like that, right? So it to me, when you think about building a program at scale, it's about thinking through logically as a brand, like what are the things that you think a consumer might be interested in exhibiting in your digital channels, right? Like if you're in the retail space, how do you show me products that align with something I've purchased previously or things that I viewed, right? I think you could get so like bent out of shape trying to think of like, okay, I'm going to build this massive decisioning program. It's going to connect all of the different ways that I can interface with the consumer, and we're going to build this massive data set to do it. And what you end up with is 12 months of a data project that delivered nothing, a lack of momentum, and ultimately frustration that there's no value gained. And you're probably in a meeting with your executive team with them saying, why did we give you $1 million to do this? And we haven't gotten a single thing off the ground, right? Like the world we live in, it's not an easy one. There's not just money floating around for brands to just suddenly throw into these things with a hope and a prayer. So the best way for me when I think about building on scale is, one, recognizing that when you run any kind of experiment or trigger any kind of experience, it might not work, and that's okay if you learn from it. Two is not just thinking about it as a one-off, like, hey, we're going to test this or we're going to do this. Have 3, 4, or 5 different use cases that you could deploy over the next several months, and confirm that you have the information that you need to do it right now. If you're going to try to build a personalization program and it's based off of data that you don't have yet today, like any of you that are hearing me say this are probably already thinking it, but that means you're not going to have the data tomorrow either, and probably not for the next 3 months. So it's a losing proposition. It's just so easy to get caught up in that, I think. But if you can think pragmatically, for me, it's always been about building momentum. If you can do something, learn something, share that with the people that matter throughout your org to help them understand where you're at, then have the next steps in the journey plotted out, it's going to make that way more beneficial for you. And you can get away from calling it personalization and just start calling it what it is. We tried 2 different experiences on our website, or we're monitoring for this behavior, people that log in, but log in 3 times in 30 days, but never download whatever it is you're trying to get them to download. And hey, lo and behold, we're going to send them an email to try to get them to do that, right? Like it doesn't have to be rocket science. And I think it's the rocket science that sometimes rubs consumers the wrong way, right? The line that I've used my entire career, I don't know if it's mine or if I got it from somewhere, so who knows, right? But it's, for me, it's always about towing the line between being helpful and creepy and not tripping over it, right? That to me is the basis of good personalization.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think too, trying to recognize that you don't need to boil the whole ocean, right? That if you get really prescriptive and really intentional about what it is you're trying to personalize around, then it becomes easier to scale that up a little bit more.
Yeah, it also. Sorry, just just on that, I think one final point is, if I had $1 for every time there was a failed CDP project because people thought that would lead them to the promised land of personalization, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be on a beach somewhere retired and very, 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 very relaxed and very happy, right? Because it's so easy to jump to we're going to bring all of our data together and it's going to be the greatest personalization program we've ever built. And they forget about how hard it is to manage data.
Yeah, I've got some feedback on that as well. My own experience has been people think that with the advent of machine learning and now AI, all you need to do is get enough data. Back to the earlier comment from Leila Tembo, that how much data is too much data kind of thing. But you can actually make the models go a little crazy with too much data, and you end up actually with something that doesn't work, even though it appears to work.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think in that situation, at least from my perspective, it's more important to make sure that the model represents reality.
Yeah.
Than anything else, right? Because I think, I'm a big ethical AI guy, right? I think for me, it's the human checks and balances on these things. You can't just set them off, because I just don't think people realize just how biased the data can be, or and how lacking it can be. I mean, the example I always give is, if the solution that's the backdrop to your data is being implemented by a person in a silo with a specific set of requirements, it's already biased. It's already most likely not representing the reality. And that might not matter to a retailer, as an example, but it does matter in regulatory type places where that personalization, could be, things like showing me an offer and not showing you in the financial industry, or showing me a credit card and showing you one, right? Where you need to be able to show your work as a business to explain why I'm seeing something and someone else isn't.
Yeah. That's a good point. We had a listener a few moments ago. Warren asked a question: if your brand had a data diet, what junk food or bad personalization habits would you cut out first?
Oh man, that is a great question.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the first thing that I would cut out would be, and this is going to be controversial, and is a CDP. I don't think, in my experience over these years, is if your immediate gut reaction or knee-jerk reaction to building personalization is to buy a CDP, I think that you're sorely mistaken, and you'll find out the hard way.
Wow. I'm surprised to hear that, because that's one of the lines of business you have, right?
Well, we call ourselves a data platform, but we actually are not, and we're very staunchly against CDP. You'll see customer data platform as a term for SEO purposes in our content, but if you dig into the blogs and positioning, because everybody searches for it, right? But I would say what my approach to a CDP is, now the fancy term they're using for it is composable, right? Which candidly is the original definition of a CDP, right? It kind of went a bit haywire. It was originally about bringing best of breed technology together to better build a customer experience. Then suddenly it became, how do we put all of our data in one place? And you had a lot of different platforms come out and start trying to offer that. And really all you then had to do was manage your data transferring and your data mapping in multiple places, not only where you were capturing it, but then where you're sending it. And now people are starting to walk it back and say, hey, we're going to do a composable CDP as if it's some new thing. But it's really just about then having a good warehouse, right? Cloud-based or otherwise, having a good data platform and digital identity solution, and then having a good activation engine, if you will, right? And ultimately then that could be multiple things, right? In my world, it could be Celebrus for digital identity and data capture. It could be Redshift and AWS, or you name it, right? Databricks, Snowflake, et cetera, as your warehouse. And it could be, the Adobe Experience Platform or Salesforce or something as an activation arm, right? Or Optimizely, or you name it, right? And I think it's just become this, is similar to what you were saying earlier, Adam, around personalization. I think CDP's just become a buzzword for wasted money and time. And I think you've got to pick that apart and kind of walk away from it to to think more pragmatically about what you're trying to do. And that's coming from a guy. I've implemented so many CDPs in my career, and I got to be honest with you, I never enjoyed a single one of them. Carbs are too good for you, though, Warren. You know, you got to have carbs. It's the
You got to have some carbs, right?
It's the protein vehicle.
Well, you talked a little bit about wasting time and money, and I think that takes us a little bit into our next topic, which is enhancing security and ways that we can prevent fraud with user data. And we all know that just fraud in the data ecosystem, fraud in the advertising ecosystem is super rampant, and it's a giant waste of companies and business time and money. So what are your thoughts kind of around improving security and how user data plays a role in that?
You know, it's an interesting concept, and it kind of goes back to the more data question, to be honest, right? You know, for Celebrus, our foray into fraud was a bit of happenstance. We came across, so for example, we've got 3 of the top 5 global banks using our platform, and one of those came to us once in a QBR about 4-ish, maybe 5 years ago, something like that. I'm bad with time. And we were just kind of catching up on a variety of different things. And one of the things they mentioned was, hey, we're using the data to actually identify and try to stop fraud as well. Which kind of stopped us in our tracks, right? Well, wait, tell us more about that. And as we got into that, we were like, well, I bet we could come up with some new features and functionality around that to actually make that job easier for you, which then launched a variety of fraud use cases for us and what we call behavioral biometrics and scorecarding, and you know, kind of all the things that you would do to not only prevent fraud, but to try to stop the number of false positives, times where it's actually me, but you think it isn't, and make my life harder, right? You know, that type of thing as a consumer. And you know, I think, you know, from a fraud perspective, it's interesting. There are parallels to marketing. I was at a fraud conference last fall, and had a whole panel discussion where it was marketers and fraud teams coming together, realizing that a lot of the data in marketing, you know, it was kind of labeled dirty for so many years by the fraud side, and now there's this sort of coming together, realizing that actually, if you've built a solid foundation of digital data, that could be a very valuable input to stopping fraud before it happens, right? You know, in marketing, we're talking about things like building experiences based upon what you know about me or people like me. In fraud, you're trying to make sure it's me and use what you know about me to decide in that moment if it actually is me. So there are a lot of parallels that I don't think people necessarily realize. And that's sort of forms the basis for sort of our ethos, right? Our entire mantra at Celebrus is to build better relationships between brands and consumers via better data. And I think better data is more accurate, complete, less manual to collect, and available in the moment, right? For whatever use case you want to deliver upon. And if you do that in the right way, it can be used for marketing, and it can be used for fraud, and it can be used for really anything across the business, you know, when it comes to building better experiences.
Really good point. Our listener, Francesca, asks, in 2025, fraudsters are getting smarter. Are we still treating data protection like it's 2015? And I think that kind of dovetails on the question I was going to ask, which is, what are the emerging fraud trends that businesses should be preparing for in the next few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I think, you know, for me, there's the one interesting thing, just the nature of our business, right? Being global is what we've seen over the years. You saw it with GDPR. You honestly see it with the approaches fraudsters are taking. You know, here in the States, as an example, we're about 2 years behind in maturity to Europe in terms of how they approach fraud prevention and some of the things that they've seen. So the things that we're seeing now in the States that you're getting a lot of emails about, the scams, you know, the fake texts, the phone calls, you know, the new ones with the toll booth texts and things that you're getting, right? All of these things are just trying to catch you off guard and get you to click something so they could get access to your information to log into your accounts, right? I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to at the end of the day, is people trying to get access to information about consumers so they can pretend to be those consumers, right? And when you think about it from that perspective, then, and you talk about the 2025, 2015, point to your question, in many ways, yes, I guess is the short answer. The longer answer is, I think brands need to become more aware about where they're sending consumer data, right? And what systems you're using to store that data, and having audit trails to understand what actually is being sent around the internet. Case in point, you deploy a marketing technology on your website. It's a third-party technology, right? It may claim that it's first-party data or first-party cookies, but at the end of the day, you're taking data from your website and it's going out there. It's outside of your network, and that's a vulnerability, right? And I don't think a lot of organizations, in some verticals more than others, have given a lot of thought to that. And so you end up with a lot of customer data kind of all over the place. And what that creates is just opportunity for fraudsters to be successful, right? So there's a data governance and a data management challenge, to reining some of this in. You'll see it in the advertising industry. That's why, if you scroll through LinkedIn, you're going to see clean rooms mentioned 13 times. If you scroll through, a few pages, right? Like, all of this is designed to try to build safer ways of using consumer data in places that historically have had you sending data outside of your environment, right? And I think that's sort of, to me, that's step one. We used to call them, confidence audits in my consulting days, but it was sort of mapping what you're collecting, how it's being collected, where it's being sent, how it's being used, right? So going beyond just the legalese of a privacy policy and actually mapping out these data flows, because chances are you're sending more than you need to other technologies, and you could probably dial that back, right? And those vendors aren't going to tell you to stop, because whatever you're doing is probably helping them. But ultimately, you need to take charge of that as a brand and make sure that what you're sending is actually required, right? So case in point, just to give you an example, would be, if you're let's say using a personalization platform and you're trying to use that to update your media targeting on Instagram, right? What information do you need about me as a consumer to be able to do that, right? To make sure that that pair of shoes that I've looked at follows me when I'm doom scrolling on Instagram tonight, right? It's not that much information, right? It's an ID that system understands, and it's a bit of information or attributes about what I've looked at. It's not, kind of a full dossier about me. But the default integrations in a lot of ways send a lot instead of just sending what's required. And the brands need to take more ownership of that. So I know it's a bit long-winded, but hopefully that kind of helps give you some things to think about.
I know, that's great. I know we're coming up on time here. One of our favorite questions to ask our guests is about their tech stack. What are your go-to tools when you think about your tech stack and what you use on a day-to-day basis?
So I think what I use on a day-to-day basis is quite boring, if I'm being honest, right? So going back to the compliance side of things, I'm being CEO of Celebrus. I know that I am a fraud target. So my access to things in the company are on a need, not a want basis. And that's designed on purpose. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that I use a lot of voice to text and AI platforms for helping me with a variety of things that I'm building, whether that's for my board or for consumers. But my day is boring. Now, the tech stack for Celebrus, much more exciting. We offer Celebrus Cloud for customers. It's all based in Kubernetes. It's all containerized, auto scaling with a lot of great work that our engineering teams have built, fully featured across AWS as our primary partner. So a lot of what we spend our time in on a day-to-day basis from a tech perspective are a variety of AWS applications in that regard. Do a little bit of it in Azure and a little bit in GCP as well, but we prefer AWS. We are kicking the tires on a bunch of the AI capabilities that AWS offers, particularly for some upgrades that are coming to our customer portal and customer support desks. That's quite exciting. And we're actually exploring we've embedded some technologies into our platform for analytics, one of which is Metabase, which I'm quite fond of, and one that I've used for quite some time for sort of data analytics and kind of sandbox type querying, of large data sets, not only to build visualizations, but to get some insights into the data as well, and create some alerting and even build things like audience segments. So we've been having a lot of fun kicking the tires on those things, and seeing a lot of great output from the engineering team around that.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for being part of our show today. This has been a really, really interesting conversation. I think this is probably one that we could go on for much longer time on and continue to dive into. So we appreciate your time. As we get ready to close out, Bill, would you like to let our listeners know how they can find you, how they can get in touch with you if they want to connect or have any questions for you or about Celebrus?
Yeah, absolutely. So Celebrus.com is where you can find a bunch of information about the product. You can check out, I'm on LinkedIn. It's pretty much the only channel I use for work related elements. I'm pretty easy to find on there. It's Bill Bruno 3, because I was the third after my grandfather and my dad. You could go at Celebrus Tech. That exists on, we've got a YouTube page with a variety of videos and demonstrations on there as well. But if there's anything in particular you want, I love being accessible to everybody. So feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, connect with me there. I'd be happy to connect you with the right people or get you the information that you need. And I've just had a lot of fun here today. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. And DW, thank you for joining us as well.
Not at all. I always enjoy these.
Yeah. It's been a fun show today. Audience members, we invite you as well to get powered by BDEX, where we can help you build authentic connections with your audience and drive unprecedented engagement. And so with our tools, you have the ability to harness the power of AI to craft audiences that truly resonate with your brand, ensuring that your marketing efforts hit the mark every time, and hit on a lot of the things that we've talked about today, helping with personalization and quality data and reducing things like ad fraud. And so we would love the opportunity to help guide you and bring you closer to your marketing goals. You can visit bdex.com and click on Talk to an Expert. And we would love to connect with you more and help you get powered by BDEX as well. For those of you curious about deconstructing data sponsorship opportunities, we're just an email away. You can also email us if there's someone that you would like to see on the show. You can just reach out to info@bdex.com and share your qualitative data with us so that we can make this better for you. And so thank you again, Bill. Thank you, DW. My dog also says thank you. It's been a great episode. We look forward to seeing you all back here with us next week.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.